sharing. So I'm going to talk some more about ants today. And today I'm going to talk about their nuptial flight, which is when the winged males and winged queens, the kind of reproductive caste of an ant colony, takes flight, which is usually happening around this time of year. Different species do different things, but this time of year is often when the conditions are best, when ant colonies have enough resources to support something like this. So something to keep an eye out for.
Can you increase the font size of your screen a little bit? You can do that with Command Plus if it's a Mac.
Let me click on Chrome over here.
Just so that we see a little bit better. Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Of course. So yeah, and nuptial flights aren't just practiced by ants, they're practiced by termites and bees. Really just the eusocial bees, not solitary bees, obviously. And there are a few advantages of doing this, having all of your reproductive caste basically take flight and leave the nest at the same time. If you do it when there's a certain set of atmospheric conditions, you can kind of synchronize with other nearby colonies, which will help for crossbreeding and reduce inbreeding. So, you know, releasing your whole reproductive caste at once helps you to do a lot of cross-fertilization like that. And those same atmospheric conditions can be beneficial to the survival rate of those young queens. You can obviously imagine if they did it on a rainy day or something like that, obviously this would not be a very successful flight. And another advantage of this is that it overwhelms predators, for whom nuptial flights are also a very important day. Pretty much tons of prey, more prey than they can eat, if they're just in the right place at the right time. So that's another important thing. So in this picture here, you can see both males and at least one queen kind of in the center of the screen. You can see that big abdomen there, kind of sets it apart. The males are usually much smaller than the queen ants. And this caste is called the alate caste. It's the winged reproductive caste of these eusocial insects. And there are some. Here's our weekly train. Go through some pictures here.
Oh, that's a great picture.
So here's a winged queen.
Well.
And so this caste actually exists for a little bit inside the colony before the day of the nuptial flight. Obviously, they don't all just appear on one day, and they kind of just hang around the colony. They're not worker ants. So the queen ants are being fed, getting enough energy to kind of create a colony later. It takes a lot of energy. A queen is creating a colony all on its own. No workers come with the queen. And the males, pretty much their entire purpose is reproduction. They don't do any worker ant duties either. So in sex determination in ants is a little different than it is in humans. Unfertilized eggs turn into males, invariably, and fertilized eggs are females. And they'll either be a worker ant in times of a little less nutrition, and of course worker ants are always being produced, but in times where the ant colony has access to more nutrition, female larvae of a certain nutrition level will develop into queen ants instead. So you kind of raise this alate caste, and on the day of the nuptial flight, all of the alates and often most of the worker ants present at the colony at that time will emerge onto the surface, kind of overwhelming predators, and often all take flight at the same time. Yeah, at least in one colony. There's not really any way they can coordinate between colonies or easily coordinate. And the range of flight really varies. Sometimes it's just a few meters, and it can be miles sometimes with the right wind or something like that. And so the queen will arrive at a certain place, start producing pheromones that attracts those winged males. So it's not just accompanied by males from its colony, but males from the surrounding area. And the males will mate with the queen, instantly die, and then the queen will set about creating the colony. Most ant species, that entails digging down into the earth and creating a small cavity where she'll lay all her first eggs. And the queen actually either will forage to feed this first set of larvae, or it will feed the larvae these things called trophic eggs, which are eggs that the queen produces just for the purpose of feeding the larvae. And then once the queen kind of gets over the hump there of creating this first group of workers, the queen has exclusively reproductive purposes in the hive. The queen no longer does any sort of foraging or anything like that. And success rate for creating a new colony, as you might imagine, is really low. Not like 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 or something like that, closer to something like 1 to 1,000,000 or something similar to that. Because if you can imagine, an ant colony will last for a pretty long time, multiple different years of nuptial flights, and it will produce tons and tons of queen ants, fertile queens. And it's obviously more complicated than this, but if the population of this certain species of ant is steady in the certain area, a colony over its lifespan will produce 1 successful queen, or 5 queens that are. It of course varies from colony to colony, and some colonies will be more successful and some will be less. But that's how low the success rate is. There are tons and tons of new queen ants produced every year, and very few of them are successful. And you can imagine why. It's trying to create a colony all on its own. This kind of bulky queen out there foraging on its own is very vulnerable to predators at pretty much every stage until it has a stable worker caste. And there are a few variations to how ants perform this. Some ants, like army ants, don't have a physical hive, a physical colony. So the queen ant, if it flew and arrived somewhere, would be completely vulnerable because it wouldn't have a hole to dig in the ground or something like that, because that's not the lifestyle of these ants. So in army ants, the queens are wingless and only the males are winged. So the males will fly to a different colony and the queens will be fertilized, and they will take some workers from their colony with them to create a new colony. And a similar thing happens with colonies that have multiple queens. In that situation, queens don't necessarily leave the nest either. They will either fly away and then rejoin the colony, or they won't leave the colony at all and just wait for males to arrive, and then they'll join the colony, their original colony, just making that colony larger. And that kind of behavior can lead to really huge ant colonies or networks of ant colonies that cooperate. So yeah, that's it. Ant nuptial flights, cool to look for this time of year. And even cooler to look for is a queen ant starting its colony. Probably won't be successful, but maybe you'll see one in a million that's starting a successful colony.